16 after 7, on to this now. 100 days of Donald Trump. What to do about the capricious bully living in the White House? He set the global economy into an unprecedented crisis with his self-inflicted trade wars and unilateral tariffs. Well, right now, senior diplomats from the BRICS nations are gathering in Brazil to work out a response. It also comes as the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, slashes growth forecasts for the world economy and concerns grow about a recession. I'm so pleased to tell you we've got from the SA Institute of International Affairs, Gustavo De Carvalho, whom we've spoken to before. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Morning, Bongani. Thank you so much for having me.
So the Trump's administration's relentless tariffs and sanctions have ushered a moment of enormous uncertainty for the global economy. It took over 100 years to establish the global economic system as we understand it. And in 100 days, it seems this administration is keen to dismantle it.
Yes, I think what we have seen since President Trump came into power is really a deliberate process of changing many of the pillars in terms of what we expect, the predictability and initiatives within the global order. I think this is particularly relevant for BRICS countries when they are looking to diversify their international relations, to find new models and new approaches that reduces their own vulnerability towards the United States, and a United States that is not only more unpredictable, that are also more unreliable for many of these countries. And in that sense, the meeting of the foreign ministers of BRICS happening this week in Brazil is particularly important, and it really does provide the opportunity for these countries for the first time to see how can they cope and deal with many of those systemic shocks that are happening at the moment.
Already, of course, some countries are keen to ditch the dollar as their preferred currency for trade. How significant is that, and will there be others to follow?
I think it's important for us to first clarify what is this idea of de-dollarization, because I think to a large degree, most countries are not looking to fully move away from the US dollar. I think what countries are looking for, and particularly most BRICS members, is to provide more options in terms of systems of payments and increase the ability of trading in their own local currencies, as they believe that even though the US dollar remains and will remain for some time the most liquid and easiest currency to trade with, because of its acceptability to settle before it makes stronger movements in terms of its own engagements. The Chinese, in that sense, would have to engage with a lot of its partners, whether it's in Asia, Latin America, Europe, or Africa, in terms of identifying what are some of the roles that it can play. But also, I think if we're looking to how China has operated, particularly in most of the global south, it has already operated very much on its own ideas of what it expects to do, whether we've seen the infrastructural developments in Africa in the 2010s, or even the broader changes of relationships with a lot of Latin American countries when it comes to agricultural trade. What I do think is for countries in Africa that it does provide them much more leverage at this stage to ensure that in engaging with negotiations on investments, that there is an increased added value in terms of the investments and trade that is done. And I think this is a pretty good moment for countries to start engaging more on that added value for their own economies.
AGOA seems to be at least something that's now on the table for discussion in terms of whether we stay in it or not, or if it even changes its current form. Are there things South Africa could do to leverage, say, on China's global infrastructure development project, the Belt and Road Initiative, because we need all the help we can get?
Absolutely. I think when we look into the prospect of AGOA later this year, I'm not particularly positive about it. Not just about South Africa, but I think in general. I think it really initiatives like AGOA really go against a lot of the primary focus of the U.S. administration when it comes to trade, and it's about tariffs and preferential access to markets. I do think that the years of major unaccounted, unlimited investment from China in Africa are somehow long gone. I think there's still a lot of important investments happening within the continent, but it shouldn't really be seen as a major panacea in terms of resolving all of the economic issues that existed within Africa and within the global South. My reaction to that is that the best bet for the African continent at this stage is neither overly relying on the US or over relying on China as the providers of solutions to the growth patterns that the continent wants to have. But intra-African trade and integration of supply chains within the continent, it is the most unexplored market that currently exists within the continent. If we are talking about 14 to 15% of all trade that African countries do is between African countries, it means there is a major opportunities to ensure that the infrastructure that is developed, the supply chains, the new investments that are done are based on the ability of also tapping into much more into the regional markets than what we currently do. But for that to be done, it requires not only the lowering of intra-African trade tariffs, as we are seeing with the African Continental Free Trade Area, but also a much more direct effort in terms of how do we harmonize some of our different industrial policies? How do we engage with the markets, with the structures of our economies in developing complementarity between ourselves? And that, for me, is the strongest possibility that Africa will be able to navigate this very tricky international environment and still able to grow and to have more leverage in some of those global discussions.
If ever there was a time for African solutions to African problems. Gustavo De Carvalho is with the SA Institute of International Affairs.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.